The African sun was at its peak, drying the savanna mercilessly with its rays. Timbo, a seasoned ranger, wiped the sweat from his brow and moved slowly through the long, dry grass, carefully searching for signs of poachers. In recent weeks, alarming reports have come in from various parts of the reserve about hidden traps that threaten not only the lions, but also other animals living in the area. Protecting nature has long been Tembo's mission, and yesterday's discovery, another dead lioness, the third this month, filled his heart not only with deep pain, but also with a fierce determination to put an end to this crime. His gun was slung over his back as always, though he really hoped he wouldn't have to use it. In front of him were clear human footprints leading to a small clump of acacia trees on the horizon. Slowly, every muscle in Tempo's body tensed. The hunter's marks were fresh and easy to see, but the intense midday heat slowed his movement and made it difficult for him to stay alert. Suddenly, the wind carried distant sounds to him, and Tempo froze for a moment, listening intently. The people he was tracking were closer than he had imagined. Every step was harder for him, and his throat had long been parched from intense thirst. The radio on his belt crackled, then quickly went silent. The signal was always unreliable in this part of the reserve. Despite all the difficulties, the guard stubbornly continued on his way, determined to find the dangerous traps before nightfall. Tempo tried to ignore the increasing weakness in his muscles and the slight dizziness. He has faced far more dangerous situations over the years he has worked in the reserve, and today he doesn't seem out of place. The sun beat down on his back as he moved slowly through the long grass, which had already turned slightly yellow from the heat. He had only a few sips of warm water left in his canteen, which he was saving for emergencies. Every breath seared his lungs with hot air, as if he were inhaling desert sand. Hours of searching under the scorching sun had drained his strength and mind. Each step became more difficult, and his vision began to blur. Suddenly, something shiny in the dry grass caught his eye. It was a rusty wire trap, cleverly hidden and ready to pounce on any large animal unlucky enough to step on it. Tempo's heart beat faster when he realized he was on the right path and approaching the hunter's hideout. As he cautiously bent down to take a closer look at the trap, an inexplicable sense of danger suddenly swept over him. Something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. Taking the next cautious step, the guard failed to notice a well-hidden hole with sharp stakes. Suddenly the ground collapsed beneath his feet, and in an instant his familiar world was turned upside down. The fall only lasted a second, but time seemed to slow down for Tempo, and he could even see the sharp dangers coming towards him with frightening clarity. One pierced his leg, causing a wave of unbearable pain, as black spots danced before his eyes and threatened to make him faint. His desperate screams echoed across the empty savanna, but no one was there to hear his cries for help. The indifferent vultures soaring high in the sky seemed to be the only witnesses to his misfortune, patiently waiting for a potential meal. As the first shocking wave of pain subsided a little, Tempo tried to make sense of his situation. The hole wasn't very deep, but with your leg so badly injured it seemed very difficult to get out on your own. Blood was slowly but steadily flowing from the wound, seeping into the dry ground and leaving a dark, spreading stain. As fear grew, the ranger realized the obvious. The smell of blood in this wild area would surely attract predators. The radio remained silent. The signal had always been weak in this remote part of the reserve, and now it seemed to have disappeared completely. The sun was slowly moving towards the horizon, and although the scorching heat was slowly fading, Tembo knew that night in the African savanna brought with it other, but no less deadly, dangers. With the last of his strength, he desperately tried several times to break out of the trap, but each time the stabbing pain in his pierced leg forced him to retreat. Cold despair was slowly rising in his throat, tightening like an invisible rope, draining the last of his strength. After several painful attempts, He finally managed to grab onto a sturdy root near the edge of the hole, and with incredible effort pulled his exhausted body to the surface. Completely exhausted, he collapsed in the blessed shade of the only acacia tree that grew nearby. His leg was still bleeding, and his head was spinning from a combination of severe pain, dehydration, and the beginnings of a fever. Somewhere in the distance there was a deep rumbling sound. Was it an approaching thunderstorm, or the warning roar of a large predator? Finally, darkness fell over his eyes, and Tempo slipped into unconsciousness, completely defenseless in the middle of the hostile wilderness. A deep, rolling roar slowly plucked Tempo out of the darkness. His body was incredibly heavy, as if it was filled with lead, and his dry throat was so parched that he couldn't even swallow. But his ancient survival instinct forced him to struggle to open his eyes and try to understand what was happening. Blurry golden shapes moved around him, illuminated by the fading sunlight, but his foggy mind was unable to make sense of the scene. Suddenly, Timbo realized that a few steps away there was a huge lion watching the helpless man with sharp amber eyes. The predator's powerful muscles flexed beneath his thick skin as he slowly circled Tempo, as if assessing whether the man posed a threat, or how badly he was injured. Nearby, a lioness stood nervously, and a curious but wary lion cub emerged from between her powerful legs. A cold fear gripped Tempo's heart, but his weak body didn't obey his brain's commands. He couldn't even move. There is no doubt that the smell of fresh blood emanating from his open wound must have alerted these dangerous animals to him. If the lions attacked, he would have no chance of survival. This thought was throbbing in his head. He mentally prepared himself for the inevitable, for the deadly claws and fangs to tear through. But strangely, the attack never came. The large, dark-haired, stately Tom approached cautiously, inhaling the scent of people and blood, then let out a quiet, almost measured snore. At that moment, Timbo noticed an unusual mark on the lion's ear, a distinctive curve that looked strangely familiar. The lioness repeated the male's behavior, and then, to the man's horror, lay quietly next to her cub as if settling down for the night. With increasing astonishment, Timbo realized something that seemed impossible. These wild animals did not see him as prey. They seemed to be protecting him. This dizzying situation confused him, but a growing wave of exhaustion clouded his thoughts once again. The last thought that passed through his mind before he slipped back into darkness was that for some unknown reason, these powerful predators had become not his enemies, but his protectors. Tempo's consciousness came and went, allowing him brief moments to take in his surroundings before fading back into the fog. Through the fog of exhaustion and fever, an old memory connected with this part of the reserve suddenly appeared in his mind. Many years ago, when he was a young and inexperienced ranger just starting out on his mission, he once heard the desperate cries of a lion cub caught in a hunter's trap. He threw caution to the wind and ran towards the sound, feeling the adrenaline forcing his heart to beat violently. That day he found a scared little cub trapped in a cruel wire trap set by unscrupulous poachers. The helpless cub had a badly injured left ear, with the same distinctive curve he now so vividly remembered. Not far away, a mother lioness was pacing back and forth in a panic, letting out heart-rending roars of pain and rage. Tempo knew the deadly risks he was taking, but he simply couldn't let the innocent creature die in agony. He moved as slowly and carefully as possible, keeping his rifle behind his back and avoiding sudden movements as he approached the trap, raising one hand in the universal peace sign. The lioness roared menacingly, but against all expectations and natural instinct, she did not attack the man who approached her cub. Timbo fell to his knees in front of the trap, and with his sharp knife he quickly and skillfully cut the strong wire and freed the little prisoner. Every metallic noise made the alert lioness jump and let out a low warning growl. Once released from the shackles, the freed cub pounced on its mother, who immediately defended it with her strong body. Then, to Timbo's surprise, she raised her head and looked directly at him, not angry or threatening, but with an almost human look, understanding and gratitude. This long-forgotten memory now lit up Timbo as he lay dimly beneath the broad branches of the acacia tree. Could it really be that this massive, powerful lion standing beside him was the same helpless cub he once saved, now grown into a majestic king of beasts? The distinct mark on the lion's ear cannot be a coincidence. Somehow, the fragile bond formed over the years between humans and wild animals has not been broken over time. On the contrary, it has been sealed in an incredible act of mutual assistance and gratitude. The setting sun casts long golden rays over the savanna, bathing everything in warm amber hues. The air slowly cools and fills with the scent of evening and the buzzing of distant night insects. Tempo lay still in the life-saving shade of the tree, his body racked with pain and fever, but his mind strangely sharpened by his awareness of the lion's unusual proximity. The strong man, whom he now called Orion in his mind, was sitting quietly a few steps away from him, his eyes shining mysteriously in the growing twilight. The man's amber eyes stared at him so intensely that a shiver ran down Tempo's spine. It was as if there was some ancient wisdom behind this look, as if nature itself was judging him and weighing every little thing in his life. The lioness and her cub hugged the strong male. Their bodies seemed relaxed, but their alert ears were constantly turning to pick up the faintest sounds of the savanna. Not only were they nearby, but they were actually guarding their unexpected companion. In a half-dream, on the edge of consciousness, Tempo saw the lioness slowly rise and approach him. She carefully sniffed his injured leg and did something incredible. She began to gently lick the open wound as if she were nursing her young. The rough touch of her tongue against the inflamed flesh was arousing. The pain was stabbing, but Tempo forced himself not to move, instinctively knowing that this odd act of caring could save him from a fatal infection. At the other end of the clearing, a pair of hyenas appeared, their eerie calls echoing in the evening air. Their dark bodies flicker like ghosts through the tall grass, ready to pounce on a weak victim at any moment. With each passing minute, her strange laughter grew louder and louder. In any other situation, Tempo would have resorted to his trusty rifle, but now he was completely helpless in the face of the growing threat. However, he did not need to act. Orion raised his massive head majestically and let out a roar so loud and deafening that the hyenas were instantly driven back and disappeared into the gathering twilight. Like distant thunder, this sound rang out across the savanna, silencing every potentially dangerous predator within miles. At that moment, Timbo realized the amazing truth. It was no coincidence that the lions were near the wounded man, and they were not just watching him out of curiosity, but were specifically protecting him from other dangers in the wild. Whether it was instinct, an animal memory of a past rescue, or something deeper and more mysterious, these powerful predators made a conscious decision, not to harm the helpless human, but to protect him in his greatest hour of need. Timbo's life no longer depended on his strength or his decisions, but on the mercy of the wilderness, from which he had always expected only cruelty, but which now unexpectedly protected him. Deeply aware of this strange turn of fate, the exhausted guard once again fell into a feverish and restless sleep. At the ranger station, with the first light of dawn, an atmosphere of growing anxiety and fear prevailed. Timbo did not return from his patrol and did not show up on time. With every passing minute, the dangers he might face alone in the wild, empty reserve became more and more real. A team of dedicated colleagues, led by his best friend Juma, urgently prepared for a large-scale search operation. Well aware of the dangers a lone ranger faces, from encounters with armed poachers to deadly dehydration,
or attacks by wild animals.
We have to find him before dark, Juma said firmly, carefully examining the cartridges of his trusty rifle. We've already lost 2 of our men fighting the poachers. I won't let Tempo be the 3rd. Armed to the teeth and equipped with experienced police dogs, the search party followed the route Tembo was believed to have taken and conducted a thorough search of the dry savanna for signs of his presence. For several exhausting hours in the scorching sun, they moved forward and did not give up. Suddenly, one of the younger guards discovered a series of shoe prints in the cracked ground leading to a lone acacia tree on the hill. Without hesitation, they rushed in that direction, but when they approached the tree, they stopped in shock. A whole pride of lions rested near an acacia tree and watched carefully for the approaching men. Instinctively, Juma gripped his gun tighter, his finger pressing on the trigger. Are they late? Have the lions already found their mate? Was Timbo still alive? But to his utter surprise, the huge, majestic lion leading the pride turned its head towards the tree, as if pointing the rescuers in the right direction. Such behavior was completely uncharacteristic for a wild predator. Juma's heart skipped a beat as he took a few cautious steps in the direction the lion had pointed. Finally, he found Timbo lying in the thick grass. A motionless friend knelt carefully beside him, and I felt a pulse in Tempo's neck. The heartbeat was weak but steady, and a wave of great relief washed over the veteran guard. "He's alive!" he shouted to the others, sighs of relief echoing through the tense rescue team. The guards approached cautiously and prepared to carefully lift the injured Tempo onto a stretcher. Juma couldn't take his eyes off the impressive lion that was standing a few steps away from him. When the radio on Juma's belt suddenly exploded, breaking the tense silence, the lions immediately turned their heads towards the sound, their powerful muscles tensing, ready to pounce on any threat. The group froze, afraid to make even the slightest move. "Last year, I saw with my own eyes how they tore unwary tourists to pieces," whispered an elderly guard, never taking his eyes off the mighty lions. "But today it seems they saved a man's life." The rest of the group stood a little farther away, their golden eyes sparkling in the bright morning sun. None of the predators showed any aggression, just a calm, attentive observation of everything that was happening around them. As the rangers carefully lifted Tempo onto the stretcher, Orion took a firm step forward. His deep, rumbling breaths seemed to shake the very air. Juma instinctively froze, ready for anything. Did the lion want to stop them from taking Tempo? But instead, something incredible happened. Orion made a quiet, thoughtful sound, similar to a deep sigh, then slowly stepped aside to clear the way. The meaning of the gesture was clear. Go. The lions had protected Tembo from the dangers of the savanna all night, and now they had willingly returned him to the care of his kind. At the last moment, before the rescuers carried Tempo away, the curious little lion cub ran towards the man and gently touched his limp hand with his wet nose. A tender moment of connection between 2 worlds that all present will remember forever. As the guards carefully carried the stretcher containing their wounded comrade to the waiting jeep, Juma couldn't help but look back one last time. Orion stood in the same place, tall and proud, watching them walk with a steady gaze. Like the silent guardian of the savanna, the keeper of the ancient invisible bond between man and wilderness. With the engine humming and the faint, anxious voices of his teammates, Tempo came slowly. His whole body was aching, and his dry throat was begging for water, but the most important thing was that he was alive and relatively safe. He struggled to open his heavy eyelids and closed his eyes in the bright daylight as he looked into Juma's eyes, leaning against him in the back seat of the ambulance, his face filled with worry but shining with obvious relief. "We thought we had lost you forever, old friend," Juma said, his voice unusually hoarse. "When we finally found you surrounded by a whole pride of lions, they could have torn you apart in seconds. Instead, they guarded you, as if you were one of their own." Memories of the last day slowly returned in vivid flashes. The scorching heat, the deadly trap, the searing pain in his leg, and then black. Tempo gasped for breath as emotions surged through him. "You really didn't hurt me," he whispered, his lips dry and cracked. "Orion, that huge lion with the black mane. I saved him once long ago, when he was still a helpless cub. I recognized him by the mark in his ear. He remembered me, all these years." Juma exchanged a meaningful look with the other guards who listened silently to the amazing story. "They seem to really want to protect you, something I've never seen in my life." Timbo's weary soul was filled with a mixture of disbelief and deep, endless gratitude for the miraculous turn of events. Whatever happened to him on the savannah, one thing became abundantly clear. He survived not in spite of the lions, but only because of their unexpected protection. During the long days of forced recovery, Tempo couldn't stop thinking about the poachers whose reckless actions had cost him not only the deaths of the magnificent animals, but almost his life. "How exactly do you track down and catch these criminals?" he said emphatically to the experienced station master when he came into his office one morning. "They always return to check on the third day after setting their traps." The gray-haired station master, a man who had witnessed many dangerous situations in his long career, listened carefully to Tembo's convincing plan. The next day, a specially assembled team of trained rangers took up carefully selected positions in the area where Tembo had almost lost his life. They hid in the tall savanna grass, doing their best not to be seen, and waited patiently for the criminals to appear. By midday, their persistence paid off. Powerful armed men carefully made their way across the savannah, checking the deadly traps they had set days earlier. Their faces were half covered with thick tarpaulins to protect them from the dust and the scorching sun, and their restless eyes constantly scanned the horizon for any sign of danger. These were seasoned, well-armed, and extremely dangerous poachers, men who would not give up without a fight. At Friday's signal, the rangers sprang into action, surrounding the intruders and shouting loudly at them to throw. They dropped their weapons and lay on the ground. One of the hunters tried to escape but was quickly caught and thrown onto the dry savanna ground. The other two realized the hopelessness of their situation and surrendered without resistance, realizing that fighting against the larger, well-equipped group was pointless. "So you're the ones killing lionesses for their feet?" Tempo asked with barely contained anger, staring into the eyes of the older poacher. "We get paid well for that," the man replied defiantly, showing no sign of remorse. "Chinese healers charge a lot of money for something like this. It's nothing personal, just business." "How much do you think a human life is worth?" Tempo asked calmly, pointing to his injured leg, which was still covered in bandages. "What price would you pay to wipe out an entire species off the face of the earth?" The fishermen remained silent as they were pushed into police vehicles to be taken to the detention center. The evidence collected was more than sufficient to warrant a serious trial: professional tools for slaughtering animals, numerous traps in use and ready to be set, and parts of slaughtered animals already prepared for sale on the black market. A week after the successful arrest, a short but telling article appeared in a local newspaper reporting the sentencing of the poaching group, each receiving the maximum penalty allowed by law, 10 years in prison and a hefty fine. But for Tempo, there was something entirely different that was more important than any official awards or public praise. When his wound finally healed and he was able to return to his usual patrols, he unexpectedly saw the imposing figure of Orion watching him from a distant edge. The lion's magnificent golden mane fluttered gently in the breeze. Their eyes met on the savannah, not as strangers or potential enemies, but as two beings bound together by a deep, unspoken understanding and mutual respect. Timbo felt a deep sense of satisfaction when he knew that the pride of the lion's territory was now truly safe. In this part of the reserve there is no longer a single deadly trap or ruthless hunter. Tembo's journey began with a sincere desire to protect the unique world of wildlife, but in a remarkable twist of fate,
It was lions who protected him in his most dangerous hour, and he returned the same in return. Natural fear gave way to deep trust, and a special bond was formed between man and wild animal, a bond neither would ever forget.
nature always manages to surprise us and remind us of the deep bonds between humans and animals, bonds stronger than cruelty, greed, and senseless destruction.